Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios. It is a delightful, uneventful day in world history, the 10th of March, 2022. I'm sitting here in the free state of Florida, enjoying the sunshine, and I'm delighted and honored to have as a guest today Jeffrey Tucker, who's the founder and president of the Brownstone Institute. Jeffrey, welcome to the show, and thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you. How's everything in Florida? I mean, I know it's all open, but most places are open now, more or less. But Florida, I think, is more open than others.
It has been free since pretty much the end of March 2020. We had a brief experiment with shutdown stupidity. And after that, the governor, who amazingly enough, in these benighted times, relied upon objective data and statistics and realized, I'm sorry, why are we supposed to destroy the world for a bad flu? We're not doing that.
Yeah.
So we've lived our lives. And it has been astonishing to me to have to go to other places. It's like an entirely alien universe when I go.
Well, I mean, going anywhere is strange because even getting on airplanes, you have to mask up, and everybody's this pretend virus control. There's a new study that came out of Catalonia where they looked at 5 and 6 years old, 5 and 6 year olds, 550,000 people examined with this. With the closest thing you can imagine to a random controlled trial, and just examined 2 school districts, one that was mask mandate, one without, and found no difference at all in the infection. I mean, and what's interesting about that is your reaction to that news is exactly what I've experienced over the last day, and telling people this anecdote, they all go, "Oh, of course." Well, I mean, for 2 years, in many parts of this country, California, most of the East Coast, and all over the world, masks have been mandatory for adults and children. Even now, you can't go to a Broadway play without wearing a mask. Why you'd want to sit in a Broadway play in a mask, and not see anybody's smiles. It's really tragic. People have gotten out of the habit. People in these areas have gotten out of the habit of smiling. And I remember the first time I ever saw a child in a mask, and this was maybe the spring or summer of 2020. I was horrified. I thought, it struck me as child abuse immediately, because anybody can look at the data and see that these kids, while they might, all get infected, although I think their infection rates are slightly lower than adults, but they're of almost zero, negligible danger for any severe outcomes.
More dangerous to a child to drive on an American highway in a car piloted by a parent than it is to catch the Wuhan virus, and it is astonishing.
Yeah, and they, and I don't want to be crude about it, but they need exposure to mild pathogens as a way of preventing them from suffering through outcomes from more extreme ones. I mean, that's sort of the core insight of immunology and virology over the 20th century. We've learned this. I mean, we've known about the general principle of natural immunity for 2,500 years at least, but the 20th century we really refined our knowledge to understand that what's dangerous, there's 2 dangers. One is exposure to viruses and pathogens that are truly dangerous to you, but the other danger, which is probably an even greater danger, is no exposure to any mild pathogens that help build your resilience. So a naive immune system is very, very dangerous for human welfare. And yet that's exactly what we apparently attempted, starting in the spring of 2020. It was incredibly dangerous and unscientific and destructive, as you know.
It has been. I'd love to touch on the origin behind the Brownstone Institute, because I came to you guys, and I just found this whole thing astonishing. Having family and friends in northern Italy in January and February of 2020, I was getting statistics from northern Italy, and I was reading them. I said, well, this is sad, but the average age of death is over 80. And that was with someone who already had serious pre-existing comorbidities. This used to be called life. The life expectancy in America 100 years ago wasn't much higher than 65. So the very fact that, in a very strange way, I watched this happen.
Yeah.
People became so expectant that bad things will never happen and disease will never occur,
Yeah.
that we set up this false set of conditions. So when anything remotely scary occurred, there was already fertile ground for politicians to grab the panic button. In 1940, even, 6% of American babies born didn't make it to a year old. So by that metric, being born in 1940 was far more terrifying than catching the Wuhan virus today. And, I saw a lot of that. I wrote about it. And I screamed at politicians about it. I got very involved in my school board here to make sure the kids were in school. And then I came upon the Great Barrington Declaration. I thought, finally, logic, rationality, wonderful. And instead, the authors of that and the signatories of that were vilified by the mainstream media and the political establishment as being somehow crazy. So I'm curious, how you reacted to all that, how the Brownstone Institute came about, what its goals are.
Well, I founded Brownstone in May of 2021, and we revealed it to the public in August 1 last year. And our direct web property has been trafficked about, we're at 10 million page views, but I think you could probably add a zero to that when you can include all the reprints and translations and everything. So it's been enormously helpful to people. The Brownstone Institute's mentioned constantly in court filings and congressional hearings. The trucker convoy in Canada was very much informed by and inspired by the Brownstone Institute. Excellent. And we're continuing to hold all these people to account. I don't know what else to do other than tell the truth. I know that we live in sort of a post-truth age where everything's kind of an illusion, and posturing and positioning and identity politics and having the right opinions at the right time and so on. It's not really about truth anymore, or but to say, and logic and science has just become a kind of a slogan that people invoke to cover power. But it's easy in these times to just become cynical and say, well, there's really no point, but I do think there's a point. I don't know what else to do. I mean, what do you do when you live in a post-truth age? You just try to tell the truth as much as you can. And so
tell the truth.
So Brownstone really was the other thing that led me. That's the main driving force. I've been fighting this pandemic control stuff since January 2020. I quite often felt alone, like you did, but what I've seen happen is an enormous failure of both parties and all ideological perspectives. I mean, the left, the mainstream left flopped, the media flopped, the right wing was thoroughly confused because it was Trump that pulled the trigger, and they didn't know what to do about that. I mean, that's why the right wing in America shut up about it for so long until the BLM riots and so on. And the libertarians, I'm sorry to report, have just been unbearably shabby, just continuing to hold their little cocktail parties and debate and debate clubs, right, while the world was falling apart. So I started Brownstone really as a kind of a way to forge a new way of looking at things that was not left and right and party centric, but rather just sort of embraced basic enlightenment principles that freedom's important, human rights are important, they should be inviolable, and that public health needs to be understood in light of these principles.
Right.
And it's not limited to public health. I mean, we talk about philosophy and history and economics and everything else, but I really needed an independent voice out there. And I think people are looking for that. There's so many disaffected people on the left and the right and, from all over the place that are just asking the question, what the hell went wrong with the world and what should we do about it? So that's what Brownstone's all about. I would say that probably 2/3 of my writers are disaffected leftists, although I don't know that for sure, because I don't ask, right?
Right, it doesn't matter.
I evaluate content. Yeah. And I mean, I've developed so many new friends in this world, and we have different points of view on a lot of issues, but you don't need to discuss, you don't need to come to agreement on things like antitrust law or something like that when the world is sweeping to destruction. You have to fight to save it, and that's what Brownstone's all about. I mean, I felt like we needed a fresh start in light of the complete failure of so many universities and think tanks, and media outlets, and
Madness.
good public health offices and governments. And all over the world, the failure was so grim that I just felt like we needed a fresh start.
And it is beautiful. We are, in some senses, a good example of convergent evolution, because that's why we set up Messy Times, whose slogan is "We're here to enlighten pain." It was another old friend of mine from college, also a kind of Wall Street denizen, and we were just looking at all this absolute insanity. And both of our careers has been about cutting through complexity and explaining things clearly to people, whether clients or whomever. So that's exactly what we did. We come up with a funnier name, certainly. Institute sounds more serious, but we tried to go about it in a kind of oral way, and it's been fascinating, the response we've gotten, because it is absolutely terrifying, the number of people in this country, the number of intelligent people who understand how insane this is across medicine, finance, just general people who understand statistics. And to me, I don't care about literacy tests for voting. I would like to have a statistics test for members of Congress. You're not allowed to take your seat until you can pass a course in basic statistics. The nation would be better for it. But we were sharing this stuff. The number of people that wouldn't come on the show because they're worried that their jobs would suffer is horrifying, right? Absolutely horrifying. And so it tended to be folks who either, no longer dependent upon an employer for their income, so they were therefore, unable to be affected by that.
Retired or whatever.
Retired, or just or those who were just brave enough and just didn't care and said, "I'm going to have a conversation about something, about policy," not pretending to be anything but a reasonably informed, intelligent American citizen who's supposed to debate these things, as we are supposed to be a self-governing republic. And we've had a lot of those, and it's been a great success. And the thing I found most bizarre, and I'm convinced that for centuries to come, people are going to write PhD dissertations on the great Wuhan panic of 2020 through hopefully 2022. Hopefully it doesn't go much further. Across many disciplines, like, how did everyone go so completely insane? And more importantly, well, actually not more importantly, this is the part that was exactly about conformity. Why did the American mainstream media feel the need to go out of their way to spend their time attacking North Dakota, Sweden, and Florida? Like, what was so important to you? If you're worried about your health and your state is doing what you think matters to keep you safe, why are you so preoccupied with what we in Florida are doing, or people in Scandinavia are doing? Because it had nothing to do with the actual physical public health. It was purely about control and social reorganization, in my opinion. And so that sort of dynamic, as you rightly point out, they are now trying to declare victory and move on, even though by Joe Biden, the candidate's own metrics, Joe Biden, the president, should resign in disgrace, because more people have died of a virus under his watch than died under his predecessor's watch. He didn't make any caveats to that. He didn't say if a president is Republican, Democrat, Tory, Whig, Independent. He just said if a president is in office and this many people die of a virus, that president should resign. Well, I don't want him to resign because we got Kamala, but the blinding hypocrisy and lack of irony of this crowd, I have found just astonishing.
But even present, COVID is a seasonal virus, and affects people in a variety of different ways. I mean, some people, my age, are actually really profoundly impacted. It's a nasty bug, but it comes and it goes, and it comes and it goes. But right now, they've called the end to the war on COVID and said, we're just going to treat this like a seasonal virus. It always has been. There's nothing better or worse about it. But like right now, in the US, nationally, deaths attributed to COVID per million is higher than it was at the height of the panic. in June and July 2020,
Yep.
and higher now than it was in November of that same year. So there's every reason, just based on the data, for everybody to be locked down, just locked down now as they were then. So what's changed? And it's what's changed is the politics, and that is unbearably obvious now, and a real scandal, I would say. Once people start to realize this, and maybe they have, I'm not entirely sure, that a pathogen, a very normal part of life, with lab origin or not, the pathogen itself is very much a textbook virus.
Yep.
That something could have been so heavily politicized and used for all sorts of reasons. I mean, one of which was probably to drive Trump out of office, and take the Senate and the House with him out, and flip us over to one party state. That actually seemed to have worked. I mean, sometimes I think that it's very easy to look back and say, well, there was clearly a plot, and there probably was, but I think it's actually too brilliant for anybody to have come up with. The
Oh
remote
yeah.
voting, for example. You can't vote in person because we have to flatten the curve. And I remember in those months before the election, I was doing quite a lot of traveling, going to the state, and that's and taking flights that had layovers, and anywhere I landed, in my phone connected to the local thing, would immediately give me an option to get a ballot. Facebook.
Right. Wow.
Facebook was
Fabulous.
texting me going, get a ballot, get a ballot, get a ballot. I swear I probably could have voted in 5 states.
So do you cast those 38 votes that put them over the line, did you? It is sweepingly absurd. I always go back to G. Gordon Liddy, who said the two people can keep a secret if one of them is dead. So for all the people love Hollywood movies about grand plots, they don't exist. No one's that talented. Taking advantage of opportunistic events that occur, people do that all the time, and that is kind of what we had here.
Yeah, and I just forever obsess about this, and I really need to drop a timeline here, because I was giving a speech the other day and kind of marching through the dates, and I saw people frantically writing, and they came up to me later and said, do you have some sort of printed timeline, because I really need to understand this. But
Right.
there's a number of dates that stand out to me. I mean, one is January 30th, where Jeremy Farrar and Francis Collins and Fauci got on a private Zoom call, along with the 3 authors of the paper that denied the lab leak, and plotted what they're going to do over the next 30 days. And we don't know what transpired, except that Farrar did say that they all agreed to talk on burner phones and to keep
Off government communications.
yeah, to keep everything quiet. So there's that. And then there's kind of a blank hole. Sometime in mid-February, there's a delegation to China, for the CDC to learn from
Yes,
from
from the
China,
ever helpful Chinese communists.
how to suppress a virus. They did virus control so well. So there was that event, and then Fauci's paper, it appeared in the New England Journal of Medicine, I believe appeared February 24th, in which he said his old view, which is that this is a flu, maybe a little bit of a severe flu, but everybody should just calm down. Well, by the time that paper actually appeared, he had changed his mind.
Yes.
And I think he changed his mind somewhere between, also he was telling the Washington Post in the 3rd week of February that we didn't need a vaccine, that this virus would go endemic, by virtue of exposure and natural immunity. Well, sometime about February 27th, 28th, he had changed his mind. He had gone full lockdown. My own theory on that is that this is all kind of an attempt of him to evade what he believed might be his personal responsibility for the lab leak. And we know from Farrar's own account that he wrote in his own book that they were 80% certain it was a lab leak.
Right.
They were a little unclear about whether it was deliberate or accidental, but that it was a lab creation, they really had very little doubt. And so my sense of why Fauci changed his view on lockdowns is that maybe he didn't really believe that lockdowns would suppress the virus, but he thought it was kind of the best hope that he had. He really needed this to stop being a pandemic because he figured he'd be implicated. Yeah, that's my own theory, and that dovetails, with World Economic Forum, Great Reset, germ games coming out of Johns Hopkins, the epidemiological community have been waiting for 15 years to try this nonsense.
Yep.
So, that Fauci was not among them. He was never one of the lockdowns, but he flipped and acquiesced. Vaccine companies at some point get involved, and now I think Fauci gave a testimony to, I'll have to look at the exact date, but I think it was the first week of March, to the Senate, to a Senate health committee or something like that.
Some equally useful body.
Yeah, in which he said he used very strange statistics. I mean, he conflated the infection fatality ratio and the case fatality ratio, right? So, infections are the number of people that have been exposed to the virus or carry the virus or whatever. Cases are people who go to the doctor and are really sick. You got a thermometer in your mouth, you've got an ice pack in your head, or whatever the thing is.
Right.
Okay, so there's a difference between IFR and CFR. So he didn't distinguish between those things, and the congressional testimony is very strange. He said, we once thought the death rate would be 3 to 4%, but now we're thinking it's more like 1%. Okay, the death rate. Okay, there's no such thing as that. You have to specify what that means. Now, if you're a stupid senator, what you think is, wow, 1% of Americans are going to die.
Right.
Soon.
Back to my point about education about statistics as a prerequisite before you take your seat in Congress, because
you could see their faces; they just turned white, and that was the beginning of the panic. And then, then the next big job they had was to try to convince Trump to pull the trigger, and that was not an easy one. They finally they convinced. He blocked flights from China. So he was already kind of inclined in that direction. He's already ready to undertake draconian measures. On March 12th, he got talked into blocking all flights from Europe, Australia, and New Zealand and the UK, which paradoxically led to the biggest social closening and super spreader events in American airport history at every international airport, because everybody had to come back to the US. And so people stood in the Chicago International Airport for 8 hours, shoulder to shoulder, spreading the virus, which again, I have no problem spreading the virus. Just, that's okay. Everybody's going to get it anyway. Might as well get it over with sooner. I never understood flatten the curve. It's like kick the can down the road. Well,
I love that, because I've been saying, of course, like right now I keep my own day count. We're on day 778 of 15 days to slow the spread.
Yeah.
And it is important to keep in people's minds, because I was most concerned about this from a public policy standpoint because of my direct encounter with the insanity of the 2007-08 financial crisis, which was solely the creation of bad U.S. housing policy, solely, period. Peter Wallison wrote this great book called, Bad History, Worst Policy. And keep getting the history right matters, because it colors the policy going forward. Dodd-Frank, all the stupidity around destroying the U.S. financial system came out of a deliberate misdiagnosis of what caused the financial panic in 07-08. Which was purely,
so you're telling me it wasn't the sudden arrival of greed?
Exactly. That's what I love. That Barney Frank, who's on record saying, let's roll the dice a little more with this housing thing. It immediately switched in Congress, because God knows a politician will never take responsibility, right? And the media, who are innumerate and the epitome of useful idiot fellow travelers, they all picked it up immediately. Bankers have always been greedy. What changed? They were greedy in 06. They were greedy again in 2010. What changed? So, having watched the massive destruction of value and societal distortion that came out of Dodd-Frank, and history seems to be speeding up, whether it's because we've got electronic communications, I don't know. But I just watched this idiocy unfold in my lifetime, in my career, watch this happen. And we're doing it again. I'm just watching this madness unfold. And I'm screaming to the rooftops and finding anyone who will agree. But I've now come to find like people I genuinely respect, I'm intelligent, educated, I work with. In my mind, many of them have what I call kind of Stockholm syndrome. Like they can't get it, they can't allow themselves to believe in California or New York that they followed insane, pointless dictates that had no validity behind them and had no utility and destroyed children's lives, including an uptick in marginal increases in suicides, for which they should be forever ashamed. And they just, cognitive dissonance does not let them say, oh, I was lied to, I'm glad that's over. They will fight tooth and nail intellectually that the people in charge were doing what's best and masks worked and all this absolute insanity when presented with statistics and studies showing the exact opposite. La 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 la. They don't want to hear it. And that to me is disturbing from a societal perspective, because it means we have learned nothing from this great colossal mess, and it will only lead to worse public policy.
I don't know. It could be another 10 years before people, before people are honest about what happened to us. I'm just in shock. I mean, I run articles every day and I get submissions every day, but I just got a submission today that was tearing apart probably 5 different ridiculous studies that the CDC put out and promoted, whether it's on masks or on hospitalizations, based on vaccination status, just really tremendously fake science. And they still live on the CDC's website. They're obviously wrong. And every day I'm publishing things that are showing this, and it's a scandal. But whether or not people are paying attention, I think they are, but it's a minority. You're right. I think the majority, just still believes. I'm not sure about this. Whether
they may be utterly indifferent. They just, if life goes back to normal, who cares who takes credit for it, right?
Well, that's right. And we needed this huge distraction, of a new Cold War with Russia, which is actually a very serious matter, a very serious matter, and and the timing, is really perfect. It's, you do feel a sense of you're just being manipulated, to lunge from one insanity to another. I think you really have to read Orwell to understand our times.
I've been saying for a while that Orwell was a dreamy-eyed optimist who would never have entertained any of these scenarios as being too implausible.
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean. I was reflecting this morning about sort of the 40 years of, actually it was more, there's like 70 years of relative prosperity we experienced, with fits and starts here and there, and wars and stagflations and that sort of thing. But generally, we had since the end of World War II been working towards a sort of a integrated global economy with lower tariffs, regime stability, and all that sort of got blown apart starting in 2018. And now it seems like that entire post-war, of course, after 1989, with the opening up of all the former, as they say,
seems like the end of history.
Yeah, it seemed like the end of history. And then
with
China labor force coming online, keeping inflation in check, and it's allowing the dollar to be exported around the world, and allowing the Fed to pump money constantly, cheap credit and everything, with very low impact on the value of the dollar in terms of goods and services for producers, consumers in the United States, was a kind of a luxury of the time. And we didn't know how good we had it. We certainly didn't know how good we had it since 1989. I remember the time thinking, well, this is going to be good. We've got all sorts of laborers coming online, new entrepreneurs coming online, global trade, US and Russia are going to be friends, everybody loves freedom. China is going to open up more and more, it's going to become democratic. Okay, none of that became true.
None.
And now we're living in a world where people are massively more unhealthy than they were before the pandemic. We're going to face a pandemic of cancer because people missed all their screenings. Children missed lots of their vaccinations. I'm not talking about COVID vaccinations. I'm talking about
regular.
vaccinations at work.
Yes. To make the distinction properly.
Right, right. So, we got a public health crisis and a mental health crisis. At the same time, we've got an inflation crisis, and the money issue is very interesting. It's been 40 years since people have. It's been a long time since. It's been 50 years since we've had anything like this. I have the vaguest childhood memories of 1979, and it was complete madness.
Oh, I remember my parents lining up and swapping out license plates with neighbors' cars because you could fill up your car in New York on alternate days, depending upon if it ended in a negative, an even number or an odd number. So people would switch license plates so you could fill up as often as you possibly could.
That was a federal rule. I mean, you talk about a rationing. So, that was gas prices. And they finally, deregulated energy, and that, really helped things. And then Volcker got, the Fed under control. But there's, here we are in March 2022. We don't see any prospect for fixing this anytime soon.
I see no adults in the room. And part of why, when people ask me, like, why do I get so exercised about policy decisions and the like, I mean, it's I've had multiple people say to me, like, I'm not that interested in politics. I said, well, to me, that's like saying you live in a tar paper shack on a beach in Florida, and there's a Category 5 hurricane coming, and you say you're not interested in the weather. Well, that's nice. How great you're not interested, but it's interested in you, and it's going to come get you. And it's important because I've become more and more convinced, whether it was my University of Chicago background or whatever, I'm more convinced that nothing is more important than getting the ideas right and getting history right. And the fact that, I was, even when I was going through grammar school in the 70s, the fantasy that lunatic socialist FDR did a good thing by price controls and all the madness that he instituted, instead of the fact was he extended the Great Depression. The very fact that people still don't get that only probably a tenth of the population understands that the policies put in place were tremendously negative for the country and are still being perpetuated. So now we're getting a whole nother boatload on top of them. And the economy is only so resilient. There's only so much pain and taxation and rent seeking that a productive section of the economy can take before it collapses. And I'm afraid we're there. I'm afraid we're getting there. And I don't know how we end that.
It feels like we're getting there right now. Officially, inflation is 7.5%. If anybody believes that, you're just not paying any attention.
Crazy.
To anything you buy, and that's to say nothing of producers. I was looking at the PPI just even 2 months ago and observing, 20, 30, 40% increases in production costs year over year. For a whole variety of essential wholesale prices and for producers. And I thought, well, if you don't have to be the brilliant economist to understand what happens, when you've got facing those level of price increases on producer side, it's eventually going to hit consumers. And now, I mean, Americans are getting used to empty shelves. They go to the grocery store, it's like, well, there's no beef today.
Right.
Well, there's no chicken today. Gosh, it sure be nice to get some toilet paper. I guess we'll have to wait until that comes in. And you remember the great toilet paper shortage of the spring of 20, which was mostly caused. It was a very interesting thing because it wasn't quite caused by shortages. It was shortages, but it was that everything had to retool. Most of the toilet paper was being made for commercial locations, which are now shut. And so the demand for domestic household toilet paper went through the roof. And it turns out, I mean, there's people who keep data on this stuff. It turns out, we're going to make up some statistics, but 20% of toilet paper use was domestic, and the rest was commercial.
Also, people stopped going to work and stopped going out to eat.
And so it suddenly became 80-90% of toilet paper was used in households suddenly out of nowhere, and it's a different toilet paper. Large rolls versus small rolls. It's completely different stuff. So all the factories had to retool. So it wasn't that was the source of the dislocation. Today, it really is very different. We've got supply chain issues. We've got, wood prices and paper prices going through the roof. It's very strange, but people have accustomed to it because they have accustomed themselves to suffering.
Which is
Because
so
after 2
crazy.
years of facing job loss and travel restrictions, stay home orders, Zoom weddings and Zoom funerals, and hundreds of thousands of business bankruptcies and sadness all around, children not able to go to school, the parks closed, the movie theaters, just the life is so devastating. So now things seem better, but they're actually far worse than they were in 2019,
Oh, by a huge amount. My emblematic moment of all this madness was when Pete Buttigieg, who was a mayor of one of 3 cities that went backward economically in the Trump years. That's impressive. The entire country, 3 cities were worse off at the end of the Trump years than the beginning. It's kind of an amazing achievement. He was mayor of one of them, knows nothing about anything, is labeled the transportation secretary, goes on paternity leave for like most of his time in office, which arguably is a good thing. But when someone calls him out on that, he emerges, goes to California, gives a talk laden with McKinsey-esque nonsense about whatever, you're going to convene groups. Well, we didn't have to convene groups before when things just work, right? But you've told truckers they have to have vaccines, even though they didn't a year ago, and most of them are immune. You layered all this insanity on the economy, and then went, I don't know what's going on, nothing to do with me. And the only concrete thing he did, I don't know if you know this, he ordered what were 95 ships, anchored out in the ocean off of Long Beach. By that time, it was like 130 ships. He ordered them all to go out past the horizon, so people in California couldn't see them in the ocean. That was his solution, to literally hide them over the horizon, not fix it, not increase throughput at the docks. No, none of that. No, hide the evidence of the administration's incompetence was their priority. And we've got 3 more years of these clowns. It is so mind-bogglingly terrifying.
And they're backed by a media ruling class that's increasingly cartelized, and it's hard to get different points of view. I just wanted to pass on one anecdote. When the toilet paper, you couldn't get toilet paper in the spring of 2020, the New York Times ran an article that said, well, you shouldn't be using toilet paper anyway, really.
You silly Westerners.
They said, it's just beyond belief.
Did they have an alternative?
Yeah, the bidet. They said, look, bidets are far more healthy and effective. And so this is the New York Times, right? Just put a bidet.
Really, go and pick it up in your new electric car.
Yeah, pick it up and get a Tesla and get a bidet.
And go get a bidet.
It's gonna be fine.
Right?
I mean, bidets in America are not very fashionable. You see them in high-end hotels and also, Newport mansions. But I mean, this is the New York Times. But there's the ruling class in this country, especially that which works for media outlets, are just completely out of touch. I mean, it got so bad in the pandemic that the New York Times would give people advice depending on your zip code and the outbreaks. Well, the street city recommends that you not travel, and that you don't gather in groups, and that you get your groceries delivered to your door.
Yes.
Okay, well, that's very interesting, because it shows that they know their readership. They didn't say you should deliver groceries to those in need. What they said is that you should save. So it's entirely a Zoom class readership and completely out of touch with the working class in this country.
Well, the good news is that's new. I mean, I grew up in New York, and we always knew it as Pravda. Like, there's nothing new there.
Right.
Well, so kind of quick thoughts. We could touch on a million things. I'm curious. I love the idea you set up Brownstone. I'm delighted you printed the piece I put up, because I've watched big tech sign on to this madness just willy-nilly, like just absolute craziness. Their censorship, in a rational sense, is going to bring down the end of Section 230 protections on them. Enough people have been outraged by this madness. Either you act as an editorial entity and you bear responsibility for that, including lawsuits for defamation and liability, or you're a common carrier like a phone company. You don't get to be both.
Yeah.
And they are selectively, in LinkedIn, or I call them now Leftin, and God knows how much longer I'll be on there. Probably, I finally got my data back, which is my main fight. It was absolute madness. I mean, read all these insane screeds from people. And my thought to them was, because I know I've worked with Microsoft in the past, great bunch of people, right? And I don't think anyone's sitting there like in a nefarious Mr. Burns in the Simpsons way, trying to destroy the world. But cumulative stupid decisions add up. And so LinkedIn's point was, we're a business platform, business networking platform, right? You could, if you're worried about, monitoring content and comments and discussions you don't like, right? If people are getting turned off because it's turning political, it's simple. You turn off the function where people can comment on things, right? If you as a business want to post an announcement like a press release, great, you post that. And the staff currently like fretting about whether someone said the wrong thing about the Wuhan virus could review that. And if it's a basic thing like we're having a meetup event next Tuesday at Jimmy's Bar and Grill, okay, it goes up. And if it's something contentious from the Brownstone Institute, say, you say no. But the midway, the nonsense of howling, screaming political opinions in support of some goofy woke ideology, that's all fine. You can print dozens of those things. That's great. But what I found most appalling, and what I wrote about, obviously for you guys, was I cited CDC statistics, and I was thrown off the platform for spreading misinformation. That is beyond Orwellian. I mean, that's the madness, right? When I asked them, I'm sorry, here's where I got that statistic from. What precisely is misinformation? Silence. Got no answer, because there's no answer. They didn't criticizing the Biden administration.
Yeah, my friend Michael Sanger, one of the most valuable accounts on Twitter, and he wrote the book called Snake Oil. It's about the role of China propaganda in pushing lockdowns. Very, very. He's an attorney in Florida, I think. It is a very great account. Just woke up one day and his entire Twitter presence. Yeah, I think he probably had 200,000 followers, 250,000. It was huge. Just taken down, and for misinformation. And I get things taken off YouTube all the time for misinformation. And so you were and post blocked on LinkedIn. This is the new world we live in, and we're sort of getting used to it. And I mean, it's not in the interest, I wouldn't think, of these platforms to do this. And so it's a little bit mysterious why this is happening. I mean, Jack Dorsey eventually, the CEO of Twitter, just left. And the few months before his departure, he was busy posting, radical content, that was clearly disagreeing with Twitter. So he was trolling his own company, but he was forced out. We're living in a very strange time where big tech that all these companies began as kind of disruptive technologies with a libertarian free spirit, including Facebook, but
the great irony.
Yeah, and now they've all just signed up to be basically agents of the state. I mean, it's so intense at this point that you do get a sense that the state has learned to sort of outsource itself to the private sector as a way of protecting it from court challenges. I mean,
the NSA
can't
hired a bunch of private companies to search American accounts because, by the time you unravel that and the time you file enough freedom of information, requests and you get enough lawsuits, years have gone by, and the executive at the NSA who authorized the hiring of the private contractors has moved on to something else by then, and it doesn't matter. In the here and now, they can seize control, and that's where Americans need to wake up, and we need to figure out a way to put people in power who don't want to do that, because not everyone does.
The Surgeon General the other day actually he demanded, and with a firm deadline, information from all tech companies who are the big super spreaders of misinformation out there, health misinformation. They wanted names and accounts and that sort of thing. And then even provided a web link on the Surgeon General website for you to snitch and rat out your friends. You know,
Right.
this information, that's misinformation, and I can't believe that this kind of stuff is going on, that is tolerated. This is, you know,
Well,
so contrary to the freedoms
madness.
that I thought everybody in this country at one point believed in. You know, I don't care if you're left or right or whatever. We used to all believe that
Well,
free
they've
speech.
damaged education for 40 years. They replace it with propaganda, and that's what you get. You get people who can't think. You get children who believe that they should yell and scream at speakers they disagree with rather than sitting and listening to their arguments. And maybe you come away still thinking they're idiots, but the Maoist brigade, you know, struggle committee
Right.
approach to life has taken over here,
Mhm.
and it's appalling and insane, and it is so astonishing to me. So you point out these tech platforms that were started by kind of techno anarchists. You know, I was thrown off of Twitter back when Jack was still CEO because I refused, despite multiple warnings. I kept sending Jack tweets because he'd just been in Myanmar humming with these great guys in the junta. Doesn't understand why people don't like them. They're really peaceful guys. They're murdering hundreds of thousands of people, but Jack liked them because they were nice to him. So I was prodding him and saying, Jack, did you have the discussion with the guys in the junta about the fact there are really only two genders? I got thrown off of Twitter for declaring there are two genders, what used to be called common sense for, I don't know, all of human history until 2019, I guess. And that sort of madness percolating, as you say, it would seem to be, especially for like a group like LinkedIn, right? Their entire business model is to have as many educated, competent professionals on the platform connected to one another, because the data mapping around that connectivity is incredibly valuable. Like, that's really valuable. And some people are dumb enough to buy the premium subscription. Great. So they get another $15 from you a month for whatever, for some heightened belief that you can pester people more effectively. But the idea that you're going to irritate people enough that rationally, one by one, they're going to step away. You know, MySpace used to be real popular too. It's not now. And the whole thing with LinkedIn has been Orwellian on my behalf.
Well, and it's very strange because the purpose of LinkedIn was to emancipate people from reliance on their employer for their career prospects. So the idea then is that you're an individual by yourself, and then you just affiliate with a company, but you retain. So it's a big problem before LinkedIn, before the digital age. If you work for a company, you know, you had to stay with that company, because if you left, you'd lose all your contacts.
Yep.
Your Rolodex belonged
Network,
to
all
them. You know, your network was gone. You had to start. So every new job, I mean, maybe not for famous people, but for most of the bourgeoisie, every new job was like starting over, and it was actually, you know, quite difficult. But with LinkedIn, the idea is that the network you put together, it belongs to you, and the company with which you associate is just, you know, a matter of, you know, the top
convenience,
line.
mutual convenience at the moment.
Right. And so
Yeah.
this was the idea, and it was a brilliant idea. And I wrote articles celebrating it because I thought, you know, more emancipation for workers. You know, this is great. Now you can take your talents and your personal capital with you and migrate around and find the best thing, and it helps people get away from bad bosses and bad companies and lower wages, and get better bosses and better companies and higher wages. Well, so when did LinkedIn start this purge of their own user base? It was really intensified during the period in which hundreds of thousands of people were being thrown out of work
Right.
because they were refusing to go along with the forced medicine as recommended, as demanded by their employers or the governments around them. So if there's ever a time when
Yeah.
LinkedIn could have been enormously valuable to hundreds of thousands of people, it was during that great purge of the unvaccinated from education, from finance,
From
from
medicine,
health.
the great irony.
Yeah.
We did a whole show where I interviewed a couple of nurses like, it's absolute insanity, right? Every nurse and every doctor and every healthcare professional goes into a hospital. If you get a new job, the first thing they do is do a blood titer for you to make sure that you're up to date on all of your vaccinations. And if you have demonstrable immunity to anything, that's demonstrable immunity, right? But they never bothered. These people who were on the front lines of COVID, who worked directly there, got it, recovered, don't need the vaccine. And the Biden administration is busy firing them en masse in a sheer display of hubristic, arrogant, totalitarian power with no rationality behind it.
Mm-hmm.
And I admired everyone who stood up and like, no, I'm not doing this. What's wrong with you? What are you, out of your minds? It's absolutely crazy. And luckily it impacted people badly, but it's coming to a crashing end. I mean, Advent Health here in Florida basically gave the Biden administration the middle finger a couple of weeks ago. So this is nonsense.
It's slowly declining around the country, but they already made their point. They already got a lot of people vaxxed who didn't want it.
Yep.
We don't know that much about adverse effects. I mean, there's some terrible reports, some reports that maybe the terrible reports are not as terrible as they seem. And the other thing is, I'm pretty sure, okay, I can't say this for sure, it would make sense to me that adverse reactions would be exaggerated, because when you force somebody to do something,
yeah,
they're going to attribute every bad thing, the health outcome, after that, to the vaccines. It makes perfect sense, right? I mean, if somebody, forced me to, at gunpoint, to wear flip-flops for a week.
Right.
And
we're in Florida. Those are fighting words. Are they formal flip-flops, appropriate for meetings, or?
I'm hardcore anti flip-flop. You're just like, anyway.
That's okay. But, we respect cultural differences here on Messy Time. We don't cancel you because of your improper flip-flop thoughts. But go ahead.
But if after that week was over and the gun was finally off my head, if things started going wrong in my life, if I developed a drinking problem, or blisters,
or top of your toe,
or the merchant across the street doesn't wave at me when I'm, everything that goes wrong in my life, I'm going to attribute to that bastard who put a gun to my head and made me wear those flip-flops. So I think there might be an element of that going on with the vaccine. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this, but it just points to the fact you shouldn't be forcing people to do things they don't want to do, especially, and these things, the trials of these things were not nearly what they should be, and the documents are coming out now all the time. So I don't know, I think there's a gazillion scandals here and everywhere. I was just looking at studies this morning. Half of the adult population reports massive weight gain during the pandemic.
And here at our house we call it the COVID-19. So that old joke about the freshman 15 in college. So, but on the adverse effects, so you feel free to take that. I didn't trademark.
That's funny.
On the VAERS thing, and this I would love to see someone go do a study, because I heard this anecdotally from multiple medical professionals, that when they were giving vaccines, right, there's that whole VAERS system, the vaccine adverse effects reaction database that's been set up since 1980 by the CDC. They were present during vaccination events where there was an adverse reaction, and the doctor told them, don't put it in the system. We've been told not to. Now, I'm not going to say that the plural of anecdote is data, but not one, multiple people told me that. Yep. Enough to think that's a bizarre thing to make up. Right?
Yeah, it could be too low, it could be too high, but it's going to be years before we figure this out. And there's people who specialize in this topic. One of them works for Brownstone, is Martin Kulldorff. He's a specialist in vaccine safety, so much so that he was on the FDA commission of vaccine, CDC or FDA something. But even he said, I talked to Daly about it. He's not prepared to say yet on how this data is going to flesh itself out.
Right.
But there's some things but here's the point. If you're forced to do it, the adverse effects are far worse than if you choose it yourself.
Psychosomatically, if you get a little bit of a fever, you feel unhappy, you're going to be miserable.
Yeah, but whenever I'm at the airport and I happen to be watching television, otherwise I would never watch that crap. But, there's all these ads for pharmaceuticals and they're like, oh, here's a thing that's going to, I don't know, shrink your feet, or I don't know what the thing is, whatever it is.
Side effects may include shrinking feet.
Right. And at the end, they have this long list. They read it really quickly. Okay.
Death, misery, divorce. You'll be unattractive. You can't eat M&Ms. Yeah, huge list.
Yeah, here's this. But the idea is that okay, you're going to consumer beware. You've been told, but if you really want to smell a feet, you can take a risk. Okay, yep. So those are risks you undertake. For the most part, these pharmaceutical companies have to bear some liability for bad outcomes about which they didn't warn you, right?
Heretic. Careful, the Biden administration is going to hear about this. They're going to come find you. But go on.
Yeah, well, so, but the vaccine companies have been completely, I guess, prevented from any kind of liability associated with harms done through the. It's the only way they could get the emergency use authorization and so on. So, but anyway, all these people defend this stuff. There's just a lot of weird things that associated with all this stuff. But like the other day, somebody sent me a receipt that Pfizer, a note that Pfizer had sent to the head of vaccine safety of the FDA, who later resigned. I think her name is Gruber. Resigned because she voted against authorizing boosters, and they were approved anyway. So she said, "Well, I'm out of here." Well, the note was addressed to her and said, "Oh, we're here. We're Pfizer. We're enclosed. You'll see that we've got a really cool vaccine. We're really anxious to work with you and get this thing out there. P.S. We've wired $2.8 million to you, not to you, but to the U.S. Treasury."
Right.
And I looked at that and I thought, that kind of feels like
it's a filing fee. It's inflation. They were anticipating inflation.
Yeah, and so I didn't know about this. I didn't know about this filing fee, so I tweeted it out. I was like, it's kind of strange that Pfizer paid the federal government $2.8 million and then ahead of the EUA. And people responded, "Oh yeah, it's just filing fee." Okay, but that's a big.
Here's a good thought experiment, and maybe this falls into the category of too soon. But I bet the Sacklers are sitting there thinking, we didn't need to get people hooked on heroin. We needed to engineer a mass panic about a virus. That would have been a much better deal for us. We wouldn't be disgorging all of our ill-gotten gains at this point. Again, that may be too soon and important.
I don't know. It's a brilliant. This whole public panic over pathogens is fairly brilliant, and because I think we had gone through about 20, 25, maybe 30 years of where people stopped paying attention in ninth grade biology class.
Yep.
And there's always a kind of a deeply ignorant impulse alive in human history that thinks that avoidance of pathogens is always and everywhere the right thing. And we play this game in elementary school where some one boy comes along and says, "All those girls have cooties," and you're like, "What are cooties?" Well,
you better get your shot.
It's a germ. So you do this kind of ballet, this gender-based ballet, and first, second, third grade or something like that, staying away from people with cooties. Well, that's essentially what we did over COVID, despite all evidence. And even now, I'm in the Northeast, and you still see people walking around all over the place with beaks on their noses and faces. And hopping out of the way when you come, healthy adults. It's like, dude, get COVID, get over it.
Or more importantly, you've already had it, so relax.
Well, probably
you've already had it. If you live in a dense urban area, you've already had it. I will close with one quick thought. Yeah, I love this conversation, but I know you've got other things to do. We were in North Carolina, so Florida, we're free. We drove a little bit north. And most of the Southeast is rational for the most part outside of the big cities. So we're in the mountains of North Carolina around Christmas of last year, and walking in the woods. And God, who's that great American poet? Carl Sandburg. Carl Sandburg's house is there. It's now a state or national park. So it's huge, empty forest. We're rambling through, kids, dog running around, great. 2 people. Now we're outside, fresh air, park. 2 other people in this whole place of hundreds of acres are maybe 3 football fields away from me in the woods, and they're yelling to me. And I think they're being friendly and perhaps yelling Merry Christmas, season's greetings, whatever. No, they're excoriating me for not wearing a mask 400 yards away from them outside. I was like, I can't even talk to you if you come close to me.
This was the most
ridiculous.
recent December.
This was yeah, it was 2021. Yeah, so it was yeah, absolute madness. Screaming at me because I'm not wearing a mask 400 yards away from them outside of the national forest. I'm like, you need help. I can't even engage in this ridiculous interaction. If you're so worried, flee that way, because 900 yards.
And here's the other thing that I think contributed to the disease panic was, well, there are 2 things. One was the absence of testing. That's the first thing you want to know: do I have COVID, right? And so then once the home test became, people got bored with it eventually, but constant testing yourself, do I have COVID, do I have COVID? The other thing is that the neglect of therapeutics. People were not told how to get better when you get sick. And I'm sorry, but that is the #1 job of public health when a new pathogen comes along. And I hope this doesn't shock you, but the job of public health is to investigate how, if you get sick, you can get better.
That's a crazy radical idea that you need to get rid of those wrong thoughts, sir. The Comrades Committee on Proper Thinking will come talk to you soon.
So they didn't do that, right?
Nope.
Instead, they spent all of February plotting the lockdowns, March enforcing lockdowns, and then covering up for 2 years. We've done this stuff. And there's plenty of evidence pouring out right now that there's many very effective treatments for COVID, which is, again, a nasty bug. But ivermectin,
I had it knock me flat for 4 weeks. It was a horrendous flu. And the doctors and nurses at one who called me and said, look, if you want to die, go to the hospital. At best, if you really want oxygen, we'll bring it to you. But don't go to the hospital. Don't do that. And that was November of last year. Yeah, horrible.
Yeah, I was out for 5 weeks. It's. I mean, I worked the whole time, as you probably did too. But
for me, for 14 days, I lost 14 days. I could, if I had been forced to stand up and have I couldn't.
Okay, that was actually more severe. Mine was milder than that, but a little longer lasting. It's different, dude. On the person,
for everybody.
But I took God, who's listening? I took ivermectin.
How dare you?
And it was, well, I'll tell you this: that after day 10, I thought this is not going well, And like you, I wasn't going to go to the doctor, the hospital. God knows what were they going to vent you?
Yeah.
But I'll just tell you that within 4 hours of having taken 1 ivermectin pill, it was the first relief I felt during that whole 10 days. That first moment where I felt the grip, the black, dangerous grip of that virus. And you remember that feeling that you felt like there's this black specter, just holding onto your back and invading you. And for the very first time, I felt the grip slightly release. And so I'm just based on personal experience, a huge fan of ivermectin. There's many studies that are coming out now, and there's a brewing scandal now that the very original study on ivermectin that recommended against its use was doctored by a ghost author.
Even better.
And associated with the pharmaceutical company, which you could find out by, get this, you'll appreciate this as a finance professional and a technical guy, by looking at the metadata of the PDF.
That's fabulous. Because they don't know how to get rid of that. Yeah, there's nothing like the technically illiterate to just trip themselves up.
Well, and I found this the other day, though. I know you probably need to go too, but the CDC came out with a new study, and what would it say? Oh, that it wasn't a lab leak.
Right.
I thought, oh, okay. Let me go. So I clicked through. Eventually got to the PDF, looked at the file name of the PDF. It was year 2020, month 5, date 7, or something like that. That was the file name. So this wasn't new.
Oh,
This was a study that had been going on nearly 2 years, and the New York Times suddenly decides it's going to make that front page news.
yep.
I mean, the amount of astonishing fakery in the world today is
Never
amazing.
ending.
And we used to have news sources. My friends who I had many friends, many American friends of mine, independent thinkers, independent journalists, worked for Russia Today America, RT America.
Right.
And I was on that financial show, Boom Bust, almost every week for the better part of 4 years. And I don't know what happened. And nobody's really talking, but they shut down 10 days ago. The entire office was closed, and every single worker, contractor, everybody was fired. This is a huge studio and probably the fourth most popular network in the world, and very, very valuable, important source of information, alternative source of information for Americans. And, as an institution, to me, represented a beautiful thing. It was like, the prospects of peace between the US and Russia, at the end of the Cold War. I thought, great. Well, they shut it to completely shut down. For what? I don't know who shut it down. Was it the Biden administration? Was it the Kremlin? I don't know. But it's, we're poor as a result.
Yeah. All that's left is Al Jazeera.
Yeah.
They do a pretty good job. But Jeffrey, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I look forward to picking another more focused topic sometime and doing it again. This is great. I love the work you're doing. And I think it's really important that, we just never give up the fight. Liberty is won in every new generation. It isn't just handed to us. Someone I was talking to, Tom Harrington made the great point that the founders came from a very literate society, right? They were self-selected people who fled Europe on the basis of ideas, and they spent a lot of their time doing what people did back then, which was read constantly and interact and develop a mental model of the world, and all those things that go into responsible participatory Republican government. And that experiment has foundered, and it's floundered, and it's still here. And I just urge everyone, don't take my word for anything, right? Go do your own research. But really, it's, as we close every show at Messy Times, turn off the mainstream media. They're lying to you, and tune into Messy Times. At least we'll enlighten, and we promise we'll tell you what we don't know. But Jeffrey, thank you so much for coming. Any final words or advice or thoughts?
No, but let me just say that I would welcome any support of the Brownstone Institute. It's hard to start a nonprofit. We've been a sanctuary for ideas. We're doing very important work, and I really would welcome any support that anybody can give, however big or small.
Absolutely. So go to brownstone.org. A lot of entertaining, intelligent reading, and find a way to donate, and support the supportive work. Otherwise, we're all drowning in bad nonsense. So thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the day.
My pleasure. All the best. Bye-bye.